restore to the cloud. Okay, so welcome everybody and thanks for coming. And I really particularly want to thank Rob Clark. Rob, thanks a million for agreeing to meet this afternoon and join us. And we're very interested to hear what you have to say. So I guess I'm going to hand over to you, Rob, just to outline what you're going to cover, and then we'll take questions as they come. There is a chat area in the on the right-hand side of the screen, so if you have any questions, pop them in there. But Rob, if you're happy to take questions as we go, then people can just unmute themselves and fire away. So Rob, thanks a lot, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you to Bart, who's not here yet, late as usual, for inviting me to do this. It is a great honor for me to be able to do this and be a part of Daily Plaza UK on a whole. And today, I'm going to be talking about Thomas Beckham. And the reason I wanted to talk about him is that I came into some possession of some knowledge that didn't seem that was out there very much at the time. And this was about 5 or so years ago. And I hadn't read Joan Mellon's book yet. And I read through a copy of his HSCA testimony, and I was flabbergasted at what he said, which led me to go back and read his Garrison grand jury testimony. And it was probably 120 pages of a lot of nonsense, and he really didn't say anything at all, didn't give anybody up, didn't admit to anything. And what he actually told the HSCA was something very, very different. Now, I believe when Tony sent out the invite, he attached the HSCA interview with Thomas Beckham. Everybody should have a copy. Like I said, you can go back to the invite and download it later if you haven't read through it yet. And I'll be touching on some highlights of this thing, just to give you a little taste of some of the interesting things that were in here. Now, when we go back to the HSCA investigation, a lot of these important witnesses, or who they deemed important, were given immunity for their testimony, which means that no matter what they said, they could not be prosecuted for it. Now, with Beckham, it was just a little bit different, but the original agreement that they had with Beckham states like this. The object of these discussions is to determine what the substance of Mr. Beckham's testimony would be if he was granted immunity. Ultimately, of course, the select committee may decide to obtain immunity from Mr. Beckham. In the event that the select committee does not choose to obtain immunity, then the select committee will not disclose or use any information that is received from Mr. Beckham during these preliminary discussions. So basically what that means is that when he gave his testimony or his interview, he didn't really have immunity yet. Only if they decided to use him as a material witness would he receive immunity, or they would bury this interview, never see the light of day. But thankfully, somewhere along the line, somebody was able to get this transcript of the HSCA interview from the archives. And there's a lot of interesting things in here, when it comes to Thomas Beckham. And just a little bit about Thomas Beckham, before we get into the meaty stuff. He was born in 1942. So he was about 21 years old in 1963. He was a young fella. He was introduced to Jack Martin in New Orleans when he was about 14 or 15 years old. And there'll be another guy that figures prominently into Thomas Beckham's life named A. Roswell Thompson, who he was introduced to at a young age as well it was actually a friend of his father's, business partner. And he was a troublemaker. I believe in Joan Mellon's book, it says he dropped out of school after 3rd grade. But in his book, he does state that he managed to make it, I think, to 7th or 8th grade, middle school. before he dropped out. And everybody that's talked about Thomas Beckham has stated, you know, how you couldn't help but like the guy. I mean, he was very friendly. He was very intelligent. And he was almost, you know, a fast talker, slick Willie con man type of guy. Very much all about the quick dollar and how other people perceived him, his importance as a person. So fast forward a little bit. So we get to 1977, October 9th, 1977. And in his HSCA interview with LJ Delsa and Robert Burris, he states a lot of things. And just to highlight a couple of them, he states that he delivered a package approximately, I'd say, 2 weeks to Dallas prior to the assassination of the president to a Mr. Howard. I went into Mr. G. Ray Gill's office. I was told to go there by Mr. Ferry, which I knew real well. And in his office, they shuffled up some documents, which were drawings, that of a map of plots and stuff. There were some pictures of buildings and cars, and there were regular pictures, but they weren't glossy. They were put inside of an envelope, at which time G. Ray Gill handed me, it was either $100 or $200, and told me that I was going to be taken to the airport. I was to deliver this package to Mr. Howard at the Executive Inn. At that meeting was Roswell Thompson, Jack Martin, David Ferry, and Sergio Arcacha Smith. Also at that meeting was your Mr. Marcello sitting there on the couch. Let's see now. I delivered the package. And then he goes on to say, my good friend Clay Shaw was also there, and the envelope was put in a magazine. They bought me a magazine, stuck inside there. I took a cab from the airport to a place called the Executive Inn that's in Dallas, where I met Mr. Howard. He says he got in and handed him the package, and he leaned against the door as if to face me, but the package was away from me. And I handed it to him just like it was in the magazine. He opened it up, and he looked at me a couple times. And I looked off in the other direction, and he got real mad and said, is this it? This can't be all. This can't be all it is. I don't know the exact words. I said, yes, it is. He said, like hell, it isn't. And I said, look, you can go call him, meaning to go call G. Ray Gill. I said, because that's all he gave me. So we drove from there about, I guess, 3 blocks. And he pulled over again, and he reviewed the stuff that was in the package. And I didn't take nothing out of the package. All I knew was photographs of buildings and cars and neatly drawn maps. Not like a regular city map, but it was diagrams and stuff drawn on paper. So, you know, in this testimony, he's throwing a lot of names out there that we've all heard associated with the assassination lore in New Orleans. G. Ray Gill, who was, of course, Carlos Marcello's attorney, who also employed David Ferry as an investigator. Jack Martin is thrown out there, of course. Clay Shaw. You know, he throws a lot of names out there and that we've heard of before. And a lot of people tend to not believe Beckham's story because it does include Clay Shaw, who a lot of people think was railroaded by Jim Garrison and really had nothing to do at all with the assassination. You know, we come to find later that he actually was a CIA contact asset in the late 50s, and who knows after that. But by this time, by 1977, you have to understand that, okay, Clay Shaw is now dead. David Ferry is now dead. Fred Lee Chrisman, who he says was a CIA handler, is dead. A lot of the folks associated with all this stuff are dead. Now, at the time, Lawrence Howard was not dead, but he said his name anyway. So, you know, it's just interesting to note about all this stuff, the names, the places. You know, we know Beckham was in New Orleans at the time. There's been interviews with Jack Martin, who does claim that he knows who Thomas Beckham is. You know, and he claims that Jack was very he's portrayed as just this bumbling drunk who was really inefficient, but in reality, as opposed to like the Oliver Stone movie, Jack Martin was very intelligent, very connected, very feared, and it seemed like he was the man you went to if you wanted something done in New Orleans. He told the investigators that Jack Martin himself is leading the investigation in another direction. And he's talking about the Garrison investigation. He said, don't worry about it. He's working closely with the DA's office to kind of point them in a different direction. Now, I don't know if Clay Shaw was that different direction or not. There's a whole lot there to unpack, when it comes to the Garrison investigation. And, we could be here all day talking about that. But he names this association of people in New Orleans, and he calls them the organization. He said, Delsa asked him, G. Ray Gill, Sergio Arcacha, Jack Martin, Lucius Rebel, or it's actually Louis Rebel, and them from being an organization in New Orleans. Beckham says, right, that's all over. The organization, headed by Fred Lee Chrisman. And then they ask him again about delivering the package to Dallas, and he says, yes. And Delsa says, to Lawrence Howard, briefly, I want you to tell me how you came to meet Lawrence Howard. You did know Lawrence Howard. And Beckham says, yes. Delsa says, before you went to Dallas? And Beckham says, right, yeah, I seen Lawrence Howard on maybe 7 or 8, 9 different occasions. And they asked him where, and he said there was a mission on Rampart Street in New Orleans that was rented out by funds from anti-Castro Cuban agency, and Jack Martin had a key and he had a key, and a lot of people came and went from this place. Arms were stored there in the upstairs. Well, we've all heard about how David Ferry was a fake preacher or a fake bishop, and Thomas Beckham and Jack Martin were also part of this false bishops of the old, I forget what that church is called, the old, I don't know what it's called. But he says that he saw Howard and Hall both at the mission. He saw Lee Oswald at the mission. He said Jack had a key to the church. Sergio Arcacha had a key. Hall had a key. Howard had a key. Everybody had a key to the place, he says. Buer says, wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald a visitor at the church? Beckham says, yeah, Lee. Lee was, well, I knew Lee. I knew him real well. And he says that Lee talked about his friend, the chief, that was to help him. And I know for a fact, and I believe in my heart, and I know he had no reason to lie. One time I told him if he didn't stop some of his crazy stuff, he used to make me so mad. He said, the chief would take care of me. And I said, why don't you stop the silly stuff? He said, no, the chief, which he told me was the head of the FBI then, which was Hoover. He said he didn't worry about the local FBI, that the chief would take care of him no matter what, that he had his ends, and that this was no worry. Lee, as a matter of fact, one day I met Lee, was up in front of the old International Trade Mart building this morning. He was giving out some kind of free Cuba pamphlets or something. And we went and had a Coke down there on Canal Street. And he told me that particular day that he was just on television. So, we have actual footage of Lee Oswald handing out leaflets in front of the International Trade Mart, which of course, Clay Shaw was the head of. He didn't last there very long. Now bear with me while I try to share this image. I don't think I can. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh no. Didn't think I did that. Okay. Bear with me. Sorry about that, Rob. I've just made you host, so you should be okay now.
Okay, let me try this again.
Yeah, that's fine, Rob. It's coming through now.
Mm.
Yep, we can see that fine.
Okay. Okay, now if you can see this image on the screen, there's two images, one on the left, one on the right. Both clearly show Lee Harvey Oswald handing out these pamphlets. And in the background, there is a person with a red arrow over them.
I think we've just got your desktop, Rob, at the moment.
Really?
Yeah, we're just seeing thumbnails of like your desktop files.
Okay, hang on, let me try this again. How about now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
There we go. Thanks.
Got that, yep.
Okay, yeah, the picture, you got see Lee Harvey Oswald clearly in both pictures from front to side. And then there's a figure in the back wearing a suit, pompadour haircut.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now Thomas Beckham himself puts him here at this location at this time. And I'm going to show you another picture if I can. Let's see. Sorry about this. Now, some people say that this picture resembles Bill Shelley, Oswald's supervisor at the school book depository. And it does in certain ways, but I just can't understand why Bill Shelley would be in New Orleans at the Trade Mart while Lee Harvey Oswald is handing out pamphlets 6 months before he's even employed at the TSBD. So let me try to show you this picture, folks. It's a side-by-side Thomas Beckham from the time where he's 20 years old. Does everybody see that?
Yeah, we can see that, Rob.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to say the least.
It looks like him.
All right, let me get back over here. Yeah, I just think it's interesting that he puts himself there, and we actually have footage. I mean, I know photographic evidence is very hard to convince anybody 100% of anything. It's just interesting that there's a figure there that looks just like him, someplace where he said he was at the time. Now, the HSCA investigation into what Thomas Beckham was doing was actually not officially sanctioned by the folks at the HSCA. And in fact, when we go and read in Joan Mellon's book, A Farewell to Justice, there's a very interesting part of it where investigators, Burris and Delsa, retell the tale of how they came to interview Thomas Beckham. They had a 2-week lull in their investigation timeline, and they wanted to go back and talk to a couple people that really interested them. And Thomas Beckham was one of them. And they had direction from the higher ups at the HSCA to stay away from people who had been associated with the Garrison investigation. They didn't want the HSCA to turn into the Garrison investigation part 2. So when they talked, they actually interviewed Beckham twice, on October 1st and then on October 9th in 77. They taped the one on October 9th. And what he told them, of course, was mind-blowing if true, of course. So they wanted to hook this guy up to a lie detector and determine whether or not he was telling the truth. And
Mhm.
on March 8th and 9th of 1978, Richard Hunter of the New Orleans Police Department and former partner of Burris, as a favor, did the polygraph on Thomas Beckham. There was no cost to the committee. So they told Beckham, you know, hey, don't shade it, give it your best shot. And as soon as they got out of the thing, Burris and Delsa asked Hunter, was he being truthful? Delsa had believed Beckham because he always made distinctions, and when he didn't know something, he said so. With liars, Delsa had discovered from years in homicide, water swells over the levee without control. Beckham says he told Burris and Delsa the truth. Now, after 2 days, Hunter revealed his conclusions. He had discovered no deception to any of Thomas Beckham's answers. Even asked whether Fred Lee Chrisman had conveyed him into secret areas where you need security clearance. Beckham said that he had. The machine revealed no deception. Did Chrisman bring him onto Offutt Air Force Base? Beckham said yes, and there was no deception. This guy is amazing, Hunter said. Despite Beckham's lack of any formal education, he was a very intelligent man. Beckham resembled no liar Hunter had ever encountered. He was telling the truth. Like Oswald, Burris and Delsa concluded, Beckham had been a young and uneducated kid grabbed up by intelligence. So we have his HSCA testimony, which he tells us his version of events, the truth as he knows it. He's given a lie detector test by Burris and Delsa. Now they take the results of this lie detector test back to their superiors at the HSCA, and they are let go, relieved of their duties over this thing. They were told explicitly to stay away from New Orleans witnesses. They did not listen, and they were let go. Now, Cliff Fenton, who was their immediate supervisor right below Blakey, according to a researcher, Ted Gandolfo, who found out in the late 80s, early 90s, he had heard rumblings about this HSCA testimony that had been suppressed. And Cliff Fenton ended up quitting the HSCA because he was scared about what Beckham had talked about and the fact that nobody there wanted to act on it or follow up on it, which to him seemed a little sketchy. Because of course, we all know now that Blakey was focused more on the mafia angle when it came to the HSCA than anything. So, you know, if that's all we had, it's interesting, you know. But then I found out that Thomas Beckham had actually wrote a book himself in 2008. And it's called Remnants of Truth by T.E. Beckham, the Jewish spelling. Okay? Now, this is not a very long book. It's very thin. It's very hard to find. And I paid a mint for it 5 years ago. But I wanted to see what he had to say after talking to Joan Mellon. Because this seems to be like his last hurrah. Like this is his final word on everything that happened. And I wanted to see if he stayed with his narrative of what he told the HSCA people and what he told Joan Mellon and a couple of other authors. So this might be the most poorly written book that I've ever tried to read. You could probably read this book in a half an hour, and I'll show you why. This is just a random page. It's very large, and there's not very much on any of the pages. Half the book is filled with letters and pictures of his various degrees. that he's been bestowed upon over the years as fake degrees. You know, he's a holistic healer. Of course, now he is a rabbi in the Jewish faith, and I believe he's still alive to this day, doing like alcohol rehabilitation and helping other folks. And I think he has turned his life around. But of course, he was in some stuff in the 60s and 70s for sure. But in this book, it basically says the exact same thing as to what he told the HSCA. It tells how his relationship with Fred Chrisman was. He states that he was probably working for the CIA and didn't even know it because of his contact with Chrisman and Jack Martin, because they were pretty much paying him. He states that he had a post office box in New Orleans where he would pick up money and packages and deliver to people. He said he worked for Carlos Marcello as a delivery man. He delivered money to the DA's office, in fact, before. He also speaks of meeting Batista and getting a $100,000 payoff. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in here. And I believe about a year before he wrote the book, he says he was approached by some folks while he was at a mall and threatened. He states that there were various cars parked on the street with no license plates, you know, kind of watching what he was doing, threatening him. But I think he said in the book that he has 8 children. 5 of them wrote letters in here claiming, you know, saying what kind of a man that he was and all of that. And I had tried to email him at various times over the past couple of years just to see if I could get an answer from him, try to see if I could get him to come on my show and clarify some things. But he doesn't want to talk anymore. His son made that very clear. So we have what we have on Thomas Beckham. And, you know, when you look at what he's saying, if it's true, you know, it does fill in some of the gaps in New Orleans and what was going on, who was possibly behind the assassination, who was possibly shooters. Because I don't know about you guys, but, you know, you can look at various topics in the whole assassination milieu, and you know you can go down the rabbit hole on any one of 100 or 1,000. And you know, people always say, "Oh, stay out of Dealey Plaza." You know, you got first you have to know why he was killed and how. And but I was always interested in who did it. So that was the big thing for me, is who could possibly have done this. Now, when Thomas Beckham is saying that he took this stuff to Lawrence Howard in Dealey Plaza, or in Dallas, I'm sorry, 2 weeks before the assassination, Lawrence Howard was definitely the kind of person who was not a good person. He was a mercenary, a bad dude, into some bad things. And LJ Delsa was actually interviewed by Jim Fetzer the last time he went to New Orleans a couple years ago for his show. And, you know, normally I'm not a fan of Jim Fetzer, but, you know, every once in a while something good comes out of something. And what Delsa stated in that interview was that when they went to talk to Lawrence Howard in California, they met him at a location, and they talked to him, and Lawrence Howard told him, "Just so you know, I'm packing heat," you know, and they were like, "Okay, well, you know, we just want to talk." So they proceeded to follow Lawrence Howard up to his house. They went in and had conversations with him in which he pretty much denied any involvement in the assassination, even when confronted with what Thomas Beckham had said about him. And he said when they walked out of there, Delsa looked at his partner and said, you realize we just talked to the guy that pulled the trigger, don't you? And this is coming from a seasoned homicide investigator of 30 years, gut feelings. No hard evidence, just a gut feeling. You know, and when you look at the interactions of these people, you got to ask yourself, I always ask myself, what would motivate the trigger man to pull the trigger on the president of the United States? And it's either money or it's ideology or a combination of the two. I mean, you can not like somebody and want to kill them, but to actually do it is a whole different ballgame. And what these anti-Castro Cubans and these freedom fighters were doing back then, they were leaving their families behind to go fight for a cause they believed in so deeply that they felt so betrayed by the president of the United States in the Bay of Pigs, and all of their friends got killed. And they believed strongly enough to do something about it. It would be like after 9/11, had we not gone over to the terrorist countries and waged a quote unquote war on them, that, you know, maybe some of the folks who lost family members in the Twin Towers believed in the whole propaganda of these terrorists enough to want to go over there and hunt them down on their own and leave their families to do it. You know, the guys like Lawrence Howard, Lauren Hall, I mean, they left wives and kids behind to transverse the United States and give these talks and lectures and try to trump up money for guns, medical supplies, food, to go on these Cuban raids themselves and try to take out Castro because our government wasn't going to do it. And, you know, when you look at different people who are involved here, and I'm not saying Lawrence Howard was a shooter or Lauren Hall were a shooter, but there's interesting things that you could possibly say would lead you in that direction. And, you know, Larry Hancock had a book, you know, a few years back, Someone Would Have Talked. And the whole premise of the book is that people did talk. And some of them talked more than they should have. You know, we know from, and of course, you know, people, you're not going to convince everyone of everything. But, you know, Jerry Hemming said a lot of things over the years that probably, you know, half of it you can throw out the bathwater. But there has to be some truth in what he's saying somewhere, or little bits of it. And, you know, he pretty much stated that Felipe Vidal Santiago was in Dallas. He had met with General Walker. Lauren Hall was in Dallas. Roy Hargraves was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. And he just happened to have a gun that belonged to Jerry Hemming. And we're all familiar with the Warren Report, of course, and contained in the Warren Report, there is the Dick Watley Report. And if you're not familiar with the Dick Watley Report, it basically goes into a report about a detective agency in Los Angeles where Jerry Patrick Hemming pawned a Johnson 30-06 sporterized rifle with 10 power scope. And it tells how Lauren Hall came to get that rifle out of hock, and in the process also bought a $350 camera, which if you translate that into today's money, it's a really nice camera. And he wrote the check on the account of one of these Cuban revolutionary funds. And for some reason, the FBI showed up at this detective agency on November 23rd asking about this rifle. Now, why would they do that if they had not found this rifle in Dallas? I mean, the reports are not there. They're buried. They don't exist. The only thing that I've ever seen of it is on one of A.J. Weberman's nodules, where it was a reproduction of the actual FBI report, but I have never, ever seen the actual FBI report or whatever led them to California to inquire about this 30-06 rifle that Lauren Hall had picked up. And we know Lauren Hall and Lawrence Howard were in Dallas in October. They were arrested there on drug charges after they dropped off a load of guns at Lester Logue's house. And, you know, when you start putting all these things together and you see how the machinations go, you know, you can conjecture all you want about Lee Harvey Oswald and his involvement in it all, and whether or not he knew what he was doing or whether he was a patsy or they set him up. I mean, he certainly had the right pedigree for it. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I just wanted to see if anybody has any questions about anything out there about Thomas Beckham or about his connections.
That's great, Rob. Thanks a lot for that. Let's open it up. What do people think? Go ahead.
Rob, I've got one question. In the document that we all had the opportunity of reading, thank you very much for that and your talk, you mentioned Sergio Acacia Smith, who of course we believe may have been involved with Rose Sheremy. We had a talk on that some time ago with her son. But you also mentioned today the fact that Beckham mentioned maps and plans that were in this package. Were these potentially the ones which were found on Acacia Smith in Dallas of the sewer system? Did he actually say what these maps were?
No, he said he never looked at the package. He just knew that there was maps. He saw that there, you know, where you could generically look at something and say, okay, that's a map, or that's a picture of something, and that's about all. He didn't actually go into specifics about what exactly they were, unfortunately.
I have a question. In the writings, you mentioned, well, it's not you mentioned, Beckham mentions the organization, and I originally thought that meant the mafia, but later on it seems to be the religious organization. Did you ever get any sense of that?
The sense that I got of the organization was basically a loose group of people involving Fred Lee Chrisman, Jack Martin, G. Ray Gill, one of the Marcello brothers, I believe it was Vincent, David Ferry, and of course some unknowns that Beckham would have never seen or heard of. Possibly could have involved General Edwin Walker in Dallas, Jack Ruby, who knows? But I don't think it was just strictly religious based, John. No.
Okay. It did leave me a little, I wondered what that meant. And apparently no one asked him in the committee either.
Yeah, no. I mean, it might be in the notes, but again, he doesn't go into too many specifics. It's more of a generalized questioning of him, and they don't poke him and prod as much as they should, I believe. Of course, I would have asked him a bunch of different questions, but we got what we got at this point.
Right.
Rob, I see that on Amazon, there is a 2018 book called Missing Links by Ralph Thomas. I wasn't aware of it, but apparently you can get it on Kindle for $10. But apparently Ralph Thomas looks at the latest releases from the RRB and has ostensibly some new information. Are you aware of that? Do you know anything about him?
Yeah, Ralph Thomas, he's a prolific writer. I mean, he's wrote this master 3,000-page book, and then he's broken it up into parts. I mean, you can buy the whole thing, or you can buy like certain little parts of it on Amazon. And I saw that too, as a matter of fact, Gary. And so I downloaded a sample of it. And damn if he didn't mention me in the first 3 paragraphs about the shows that I did on this before. So I don't know. I haven't dove into it much. I mean, I know the first document is the one that we attached, which is the HSCA transcript in the book. I've not spent the $10 to see what any new, anything new that has come out. I mean, I think by now, almost 2 years later, people would have poured through these things enough to where if something was in there, it would have popped out like a lion. But I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to, Gary, when he's talking about that particular part of it shedding light on the Beckham story. I think he's talking about the JFK assassination as a whole when he's referring to new documents.
Cool.
Oh,
Hi there.
have you got an opinion on Fredley Chrisman?
Yes. Fredley Chrisman, he's an interesting character. If anybody doesn't know anything about Fredley Chrisman, he first came about because of the Maury Island incident, which was a UFO sighting that happened in 1947. I believe it was up in Washington State. And it's hard to pin this guy down on exactly what they saw. I mean, I think it's since been debunked that it was some kind of a hoax, or to get his writings in some kind of a pulp fiction magazine or something of that nature. Of course, 47 is when Roswell happened. It's when the Kenneth Arnold sightings happened, and this was kind of the birth of the whole UFO phenomenon here in the United States. And maybe it was just something that he wanted to jump on at the time, or some have speculated, given his background, his military background, and his aviation background, that he was possibly trying to cover up some kind of technology that either the Nazis had developed, and we possibly stole. I mean, I've even heard crazier things than that involving Jack Parsons doing some kind of a Aleister Crowley satanic ritual in 1947 and opening up a portal that these things came through that they were trying to suppress. Who knows the truth? And now in Joan Mellon's book, she does go into a lot more detail about Fred Chrisman and his alleged bona fide ties to the CIA. Of course, the CIA has officially come out and said that Beckham and Chrisman were never employed by the CIA. But if you search hard enough, there is a CIA document out there that refers to Chrisman as being a CIA asset. And he could be one of those rogue, quote, rogue elements of the CIA who kind of facilitated this whole thing. I mean, he said, Thomas Beckham stated that in 1963, Fred Chrisman had the ability, he had a phone under his dashboard in his car where he could call seemingly anybody he wanted. Fred Chrisman took him on Offutt Air Force Base, and where he met a Colonel Lowry, who was part of the Operation Looking Glass, which is an airplane or a fleet of planes they used to keep in the air 24/7 for 29 years straight in order to be a secondary command if something were to ever happen. Like say they nuked DC, well, there'd always be a plane in the air somewhere over the the middle part of the United States to where we could assume command and launch intercontinental ballistic missiles from these planes. And it seems that there was a propaganda surrounding this Looking Glass operation where they wanted it known that we had it as a deterrent, so that Russia or whoever decided that they wanted to take our stuff out, just for them to know that, hey, you can take that out, but we're still going to be able to launch back no matter what you do. So it's hard to say. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that Beckham is saying about Chrisman, that he had pull and he had power, and he had a phone in his car in 1963. So it's crazy.
Yeah. Rob,
Yes.
do you know what kind of conditions? Do you know what kind of conditions Thomas Beckham's polygraph test was kind of under? What kind of like control questions he was asked, etc.?
No, we don't have any records of the actual test itself. Joan Mellon doesn't go into too much detail about the questions asked in her book either. And that's the only place I've ever found the information on it. I mean, even in Thomas Beckham's book, he doesn't mention the polygraph or the questions asked. So it's up in the air. I mean, it was given by, a sergeant in the police department who normally did the lie detector tests. It was done as a favor to Burris and Delsa, who had been part of the homicide division of New Orleans PD for 30 years. So I imagine it was, under the good circumstances. But, people can also say too, with Beckham being the type of guy that he was, the phony that he was, the con man that he was, that he could surely lie his way out of anything and be believable doing it. But, again, it takes a certain amount of skill, I think, to be able to beat a lie detector test on every question.
Yeah.
Rob, sorry, Stuart. Rob, hi, it's Neil.
Hey, Neil.
Hi there, mate. I've just got a couple of questions, if you don't mind. The first one is with reference to a paragraph, top of page 18 of the Beckham HSCA transcript, in which he says, quote, "In another meeting I met with Lee was that when he talked about just getting back from Mexico and he was going to be coming into some money." I mean, there's two questions there. There's two points of interest there. I think, firstly, I mean, there's a lot of discussion whether he was in Mexico or not. So I'd like to, get your views on that. And secondly, with respect to the coming into some funds, I listened to a Mary Hollis oral history at the Sixth Floor Museum. A very strange interview, but one of the things that she said, which really sort of caught my attention, was that allegedly he said to her that he was going to come into some money soon, and he was suggesting that he would, he could take her to Russia and all sorts of funny things. But that was the first time I've ever heard anything about Oswald and, getting rich. And it's interesting that Beckham has also alluded to this as well. So maybe that's more of an open question to the whole group, because one tends to think that he's either a nutter or he's an agent, or he thinks he's an agent, or it's possibly ideological, but certainly we don't hear about it being driven by financial motivation. So if you could just tackle those two questions, please, Rob.
Yeah, Mary Hollis is an interesting one. I don't know how much of what she says can be believed. She says some pretty nutty things, and so that's, who knows? When allegedly when Oswald went and test drove that car in Dallas, he told the guy that he'd be back, that he was going to be coming into some money.
I was thinking that.
There's another instance of that being attributed to him. It's hard to say. I think when Oswald left the Marine Corps and was going, and he hopped that freighter in New Orleans, headed for England, actually first, and I believe they stopped in Cuba, and there's nothing at all we know about Oswald in Cuba at the time, but that may have set his mindset one way or the other. And then of course, once he got to Russia, he got to experience communism at its most pure form. so it's really hard to say after he got back, was this whole thing with, Fair Play for Cuba Committee just a ruse, or was it something that he believed in? Me personally, I think it was a ruse. There's just too much out there, when it comes to Bannister's office and what was going on there, and the things, alleged by like Carlos Bernier and Carlos Quiroga, and all the stuff that was going on in New Orleans at the time. And I didn't even mention, how odd it was. If anybody out there is familiar, that's seen the James Martin film. And this was, I believe the FBI had it by January of '64. And Dallas FBI never saw the film. It was sent directly from Minneapolis to New Orleans, where they deemed it had no value whatsoever. And this guy, Martin, went on a trip to Dallas. It starts off, you see the plane in the sky, the clouds in the sky. He lands at Dallas, and then cut scene to General Edwin Walker's house on Turtle Creek Boulevard. The mailbox, the house, the window gets zoomed in on where he was allegedly shot through. And then cut scene to New Orleans, where Oswald is in a street fight with some Cubans. And then they see pamphlets, free Fair Play for Cuba, or Hands Off Cuba pamphlets all over the sidewalk. And then that's the end of the movie. Very strange. That, somehow these two things end up, because the guy who had taken the movie had used to be in the service with General Edwin Walker, and respected and revered him. And it's just odd that we have this movie that somehow, in August of '63, it goes from General Walker to Lee Oswald in New Orleans, and that's the street fight. It's very weird stuff. Hi, Bart.
Say something.
I've got a question for you, Rob.
Shoot.
What's your, of course, all this stuff is related to the Garrison investigation. Now, I'm not asking you to give me the whole lowdown on it, but what's your take on the Garrison investigation overall? I thought he was a courageous man, but he was also quite naive and also made a lot of costly mistakes. That's my take. Could that whole prosecution could be done a lot better and all that, but he did manage to get something out of it, but not what should have been. But what's your take on the whole thing?
I think when David Ferry died, that was it for him. He was done, because and Beckham says the same thing. Jack Martin, he even says, when they're talking about being subpoenaed, he says, why don't they subpoena Jack Martin? He knows all those guys mixed up in the thing. Well, there's a good question. So why didn't Garrison ever subpoena Jack Martin?
Good question.
He was hell bent on getting Fred Crispin there, Thomas Beckham there, Lawrence Howard there, Hall there. I think somebody, I think Garrison knew basically what happened, but he can never prove it. So, and he was stubborn enough to just go with what he had. And with Clay Shaw, he didn't have much.
No.
But that's what he had to deal with. Because when Beckham was there, he didn't tell him anything. When Crispin was in the grand jury, he didn't say anything. Of course, he didn't call G. Ray Gill. He couldn't call David Ferry. He accused Dean Andrews of perjury.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother thing. So yeah, that's. I think he had good intentions, Bart, but I think he got hamstrung and was just too stubborn to just throw the towel in.
His investigation was sabotaged as well. Files were stolen from him.
Yeah.
So I think that actually Bill Davies got a great book called Let Justice Be Done. And that speaks about the Garrison investigation. And I think he could have made a better case for it, but he was getting sabotaged. And he was trying to subpoena witnesses, and witnesses were, subpoenas were being refused. I can't remember who tried. Did not try and get, what's that guy's name? What's the guy's name? Kerry Thornley. Did not try and get Thornley, and they refused to extradite him to New Orleans for it.
That was a big mess. I mean, like in Garrison, and I think in the book, A Farewell to Justice, she talks about when Jim Garrison, after Thomas Beckham had testified to the grand jury, he went back to his parents' house, and Garrison called him on the phone and said, "Listen, Tommy, just tell me how close I am. Just tell me if I'm close." And he pretty much told him, I don't know. I can't tell you anything. And of course, years later, Beckham told Joe Millen that that's the thing he most regrets, is not opening his mouth at that moment and letting Garrison know exactly how close he really was to finding out the truth, according to Beckham.
Touching on the question there about Oswald in Mexico City and whether he was a communist or whether he was working for an intelligence community. When Oswald is arrested in a fight with Carlos Benguer, he's arrested, and the lieutenant, a guy called Francis Martello, said that he thought the incident was staged. And when Oswald was arrested, he asked to speak to the FBI, and he told them that, just tell them that you have Lee Oswald in custody. That's a very strange thing to do if you're a communist handing out communist propaganda on an American street. And it's even weirder that the FBI even granted him the interview. So I think he was an FBI informant, and I think his whole sheep dipping, if you want to coin the phrase, was to make him appear that he was a communist, when in fact he wasn't.
Can I just interject? Somebody's got their microphone open and basically muzzles it down, and I can't hear it properly. So
somebody talking on the telephone.
Yeah, it's whichever camera has there's a light fitting, a ceiling light fitting. I think it's coming from that.
Isn't it iPad 6?
Yeah.
Here, I'll mute him.
That's it. Yeah, you've muted.
That's David, yeah.
He's bookie.
Yeah, John, I have something about Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans and the FBI. And this is an interview with William Walter, who worked in the New Orleans office of the FBI.
The telex.
What's that?
The telex.
The telex.
Yeah, the FBI telex that came in. Isn't that William Walter, or am I mixing things up here? Is that the same William Walter?
Yeah, you might be. But this is where he's just talking about. He said, yes, and Agent Quigley handed me a memorandum with Lee Harvey Oswald's name on it and asked me to check the indexes and determine whether or not there was any file or files that named of that named individual in the New Orleans office. And he says he recalls searching the indexes and finding a card that showed more than one file number, which would indicate we had more than one case, not necessarily meaning that the cases were on active investigation, but that sometime during the New Orleans office inquiry into Oswald, there were cases that his name appeared in other than one file. He says, when I searched for those files in the normal filing area of the Bureau, which was an open bay filing, the files were not there. They were missing. They fell into the security type, informant type files, 105 classifications, and 134s. So basically, this guy's saying that the New Orleans FBI files on Oswald were gone. They had disappeared. He said, what I found was a file in the special agent in charge's locked file cabinet. I don't recall the file number, but I recall on the jacket of the file a special agent DeBreeze's name. I want to make a point. I only found one file, even though, as I recall, there were more files listed that our office had that I had Oswald's name referenced in them. But all these files ended up disappearing from the New Orleans office that would have shown whether or not Oswald was an informant. For sure, one way or the other.
Just a coincidence that those files disappeared.
Yeah.
Rob,
I mean,
you
if
mentioned the film went from Minneapolis to New Orleans. Minneapolis.
Yes.
Why Minneapolis? Do you have any idea?
That was where the guy was from that filmed it, James Martin. He lived in Minneapolis.
That's right. Yeah. I tried to track down his relatives that are still here. Didn't make any headway. Couldn't get to them. But it's interesting that he operated out of here for whatever reason. I don't know if he was born here, but
Yeah, the only place I've seen that movie is on if you go to the 6th Floor Museum's website and go to their movie section, you can actually watch it online, and that's the only place I've seen it.
okay.
It's not very long.
On page 7, just curious, it talks about Beckham hitting the road because he starts to get worried about being in New Orleans, and he says, I end up in Lincoln, Nebraska. Then Chrisman finds him in Lincoln and tells him to get out of town, and he goes to Omaha. And what occurs to me is it's barely 50 miles from Lincoln to Omaha, and he's safe in Omaha. And then at another point he's told, go to Iowa because they can't serve your papers there. Well, Omaha is right on the Iowa border, so it's 5 minutes to get to Iowa. So it's kind of a tight window between Lincoln and Omaha. Offutt Air Force Base, which is the main strategic air command base in North America, is there. And Offutt Air Force Base is mentioned. So I'm wondering if there's something, some contact at Offutt that is significant.
Yeah, well, he talked about meeting this Colonel Lowry that worked at Offutt and worked in Looking Glass. I'm not sure if he was part of the guys that rode the planes around or not, but certainly there's some kind of maybe DOD connection to that Air Force base. The physical area itself, I believe, he states he went to Omaha and him and Fred Chrisman opened up a thrift store of some sort. And he jokes around that they didn't sell anything in 8 months. It's just weird stuff. He was trying to move him around and hide him away, telling him where to go. Always seemed to know where he was, even though, and Beckham may have had family in Nebraska as well. I believe he says Chrisman called him at his brother's house when he was there, staying there one time, and he had never told Chrisman his brother's name or number or anything. He said, it just seemed like the guy always knew where I was or knew how to find me.
Yeah, that would explain Lincoln if he had relatives there. He just didn't just wander there. You don't go to Lincoln
Right.
for no reason.
Yeah, I think one of his brothers was from there. And even though he moved to Omaha or Iowa, they said they couldn't get him there. I think that's where they extradited him from to New Orleans. So apparently that didn't work either.
It seemed like it was a setup. He was lured back across the Missouri River from Iowa into Omaha. like I said, 5 minutes, and he was seemingly suspicious, but that's when they served him papers. It was a setup.
And he still had warrants open in New Orleans from the beginning of the 60s that he was afraid to go back for. He was afraid that they would get him on that, somehow get him into prison and then kill him while he's in prison.
Thank you.
Anything else, fellas?
Yeah, Rob. I know John touched on this earlier on regarding the religious crew of God botherers in this case. We know CIA utilizes things like YMCA. And in this case, you've got Dave Ferry, who's, like you said, some bishop in, and the Paynes even are Quakers. And you've got Crisman and Beckham, and there's also mentioned in Mellon's book Herman Keck, who's something to do in the worldwide church. You mentioned as well going down, you can go down all these rabbit holes with this case. And one of the rabbit holes that I've recently dived down in was a UK, an English participant in this saga, Albert Osborne, who was purportedly on the Red Arrow bus from Monterey to Mexico City, and he was an itinerant preacher who had a false name of John Howard Bowen, and John Howard Bowen was something of an evangelical preacher. You found any links with Beckham into any of these others? All bishops and what have you?
Well, I did hear a few years ago, a guy by the name of Peter Levenda wrote a book about his experiences as a fake bishop in the 60s, and they were actually able to impersonate bishops from another country and actually penetrate Bobby Kennedy's funeral in New York. They said they rented a limousine, arrived, pretended like they were important people. They really weren't anybody. They were escorted in, given a seat right behind the family, treated like dignitaries. You got to remember, if you walk the walk and talk the talk,
yeah, you're in.
You're in. And it would behoove, some people, if they could come off acting as a priest or bishop or some religious entity, you could have access to hospitals, pretty much, if you needed anything, more people would be more inclined to give it to you. Your so-called church, you could act as a front for other things,
This is a really good tip for when I go down to Dallas and go to interview a few of these people. I'm gonna wear a robe. They'll talk like Niagara Falls. I'm not
exactly.
What color?
Yeah. It just seems like it was a good front for these guys to be able to have this in their back pocket if needed. Hey, we can throw the collar on, we can throw the robes on. It garnered you instant respect from people back then, and a level of unquestioning from other people. You know, you're much less likely to question, hey, what are you doing here? You know, well, I'm a priest. You know, what do you want from me?
Yeah, it seems to add an aura to you, doesn't it? I thought there's a long way.
Right.
Wasn't there a story about a priest in the DPD the weekend when Oswald was obviously being questioned? There was something about a priest in an elevator or something like that, and it might have been on a Sunday. Can't remember much about it.
I haven't heard that.
No,
when Jack Ruby was dressed up.
I've delved in everything. I've never heard read or anything about a priest being in there. Nowhere close.
No, it might have just been something I've probably been getting mixed up somewhere.
Yeah, Rob, and again, just in addition to this, where I mentioned Albert Osborne, there's some, it's probably in some book from a long time ago or something that Chrisman was linked with Albert Osborne running a sort of assassination group in Mexico. I don't actually believe that report, but
talking about the Torbett document?
Is that what it is?
I think so.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think that's where I've read it.
Pete, Pete, there's a book. Pete, there's a book by a guy called Richard A. Sprague, Taking of America 1, 2, 3, and he lists a lot of these gunboat cowboy guys as being part of the assassination teams in Dealey Plaza, and he's asserting that Albert Osborne was in charge of all of the teams, although he wasn't actually in Dealey Plaza.
Yeah, he was in the UK.
Yeah, where was he? Okay, well, maybe that's the book that you might be remembering.
Right. Yeah, it's what I've read. So it seems a bit wild, and you know, I've not been able to get any further corroboration on the Chrisman Osborne thing.
Rob, I had one more question for you, if you don't mind. In your Prime Suspects episode, which I thought was really good, you mentioned, and it came from a Stephen Jaffe interview, that Lauren Hall was going to write a book on the assassination. Did he ever put pen to paper in any fashion?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No? Okay. And your book, the Beckham book, Remnants of Truth, is there anything in there that's a revelation that's interesting?
No, it's just more of exactly what he told the HSCA. It's like he didn't vary much from anything. Like I showed you the book. It's very short, big writing, maybe 100 pages.
But in and of itself, that's rather telling, isn't it? Because you would think that, you know, was it self-published, by the way? Was it?
Yeah, self-published.
Yeah. You would think that if he was doing that, the temptation to glamorize his art or to up the ante would have been quite a large one. So it's quite telling that he sticks to very much the same story, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it came off very much like a final word from him. As you know, I don't think he was in good health around that time, and I think he just wanted to put pen to paper, and be it his last word on everything. You know, but apparently, as far as I know, he's still alive.
Yeah. Does he mention much about Jack Ruby in the book? Does he?
He does mention Jack Ruby. He states, you know, that he had met Jack Ruby, that Lee Oswald did know Jack Ruby, that Ruby had come to New Orleans a few times, and he had met him there.
You gonna call him, Rob?
Do what?
Are you gonna call him?
Who? Beckham?
Beckham and the others?
No, I said earlier, I've tried emailing him, and his son pretty much stated he's not talking anymore. That he's done. So, I mean, like I said, this is probably his last word on this thing. And he did put something in the book about the time that Oliver Stone was making the movie JFK. They approached him, you know, for his input or to, you know, and he said he kind of turned himself up to 15 and started telling them a bunch of wild stories and stuff, and basically made them shy away from wanting to have any of his input in the movie at all. And he said that was done on purpose by him because he didn't want to be a part of it. He didn't want anything to do with it. So if this was some guy looking for fame and fortune and all that nonsense, then there's other things he could have done to achieve that. But, you know, he's pretty much laid low.
I know he's a priest now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but so actually contacting Joan Mellon would be the second option then in that case, because of course she only uses a little bit of what he actually said. Or did she put the whole interview in the book? I think I've read her book, but it's too long ago. More than 10 years at least.
You know, everything's never in the book. So
True.
Yeah, there might be more out there.
Rob, did Thomas Beckham ever did they ever disclose, or was they ever asked how Oswald managed to find the money to pay people to help him hand out leaflets? Did they ever know where Oswald got the money from?
No, I mean, he stated that how he got money was doing favors for Jack Martin and Guy Bannister. The Guy Bannister would pay him, you know, here $5 or $10, you know, hey, run this key over to whoever, or deliver this envelope to whoever. Just basically being a gopher was all he was to these people. Sure, he wasn't privy to everything that they were doing or everybody that was involved. He was basically very low level. And he even states, I think in Joan Mellon's book, that he was maybe being considered as a backup patsy, you know, if Oswald didn't work out. It's hard to say.
Did they have like any prior to New Orleans? What would have been his CV almost to pin this crime on him? Did he go to Russia? Did he do any communist affairs and stuff?
Nothing crazy communist. He just had a very long rap sheet. Interestingly, though, he had been admitted to a mental hospital at the beginning of 1963. And I believe that was the second or I know it was 3 times altogether, but I can't remember the order in which he was in. And I know he went against his will to at least one, and then he says the other 2, he pretty much went there himself to kind of lay low and get away from things for a while.
It wasn't the same mental hospital that they tried to get Oswald to get the job in, was it?
No, that was East State. I think Beckham went to Mandeville.
Nah, right, okay. Thank you.
Rob,
Yes.
a little background on on Chrisman. You know, he apparently was involved, according to this House Assassinations Committee report, connected to Project Blue Book, which was the UFO flap. It's interesting that kind of activity kind of meshes with the fact that the CIA in the 50s was in the process of using people like Joseph Campbell, the Harvard American mythologist, but I think he's probably known in Britain pretty well. He signed off on a study done at Stanford University in California that was done because the CIA was interested in creating New Age religions, which UFO cults would be a part of. And the idea was that with so many young Americans and Europeans, especially Americans, becoming disaffected from traditional religion that they grew up with from their parents, that social control theory was all about finding ways to vent that kind of energy into harmless areas, and New Age religions were made to order for that. And so here they actually have Joseph Campbell, the world's most significant mythologist, signing off on the report. How much he actually had to do with it, I don't know. But there you have Chrisman involved at some level with Project Blue Book, and you know, the UFO cults that have developed since then, you know, certainly attract a lot of people and diffuse their political activity into harmless areas. Just something that occurred to me.
No, you're right. You know, I talked to Adam Go Rightly, who's written a couple books on Kerry Thornley and, you know, all this crazy stuff that was going on in the 60s with the hippies. And in the last show I did with them, we actually did a show about Raymond Brashears. And, you know, he got to talking about this one strange UFO cult led by Dr. Frank Stranges. And interestingly enough, in this Beckham book, he's got a letter. He asked people that he knew to write him, you know, letters and tell him what they thought about him. Okay, weird stuff. But anyway, he's got one in here from Dr. Frank Stranges, as a matter of fact, that says this: I have known Rabbi Dr. Thomas E. Beckham for nearly 35 years. Whatever he does it well. He is a fine family man who is always self-giving. He is very well educated in religion, psychology, and naturopathy medicine. I think that he has written a very educational book that will answer or bring together missing parts of the JFK investigation. I wish him only the best. Dr. Frank Stranges. So, you know, this stuff is certainly out there. The connections are there. How far you want to go with them is a whole nother ball game. Because when you start talking about, you know, Chrisman, I know like Garrison thought he was one of the tramps, which I think that that's not correct whatsoever. But Garrison seemed convinced of it. You know, and then I think Ken Thomas wrote a very good book called JFK and the UFO that dives into a lot of this stuff with Chrisman and Beckham and what was going on back then during the time with these UFO sightings and just exactly what these guys were up to. Very interesting book as well.
You know, I think the fallout from that whole CIA project to create New Age religions is that people like Ted Sorensen that, you know, coined the famous phrase, "That's not what your country can do for you." He was at a conference, I think I mentioned it a month ago, that John Williams was instrumental in setting up at the University of North Dakota in 2008. And Ted Sorensen was a keynote, and I was speaking also, and so I got my foot in the door with him and spent numerous times with him during the weekend. And we were standing at a dedication, and he didn't know me from a man on the moon, but he assumed that where he was at that point, in the middle of nowhere in North Dakota, was full of UFO conspiracy, off the wall types. And he said to me, I am not going to go to my grave being blamed for JFK's assassination because I wrote a speech about secret societies. And he was obsessed with the fact that you'd Google secret societies in JFK and you'd get a list of sites longer than your arm.
Yeah.
And so here we have 57 years later, for the last 57 years, you might as well say, people being diverted from who killed Kennedy to Kennedy thinking he was killed by a secret society. Call it the cult at Yale University or whatever. But there you go. I mean, the CIA's attempt to create these alternative religions attracted people that then they associated with the killing of Kennedy, and it distracted from real research. Not that there weren't people doing real research, but too many were diverted. And Ted Sorensen was totally spooked by it when he said to me, "I'm not going to my grave being blamed for the assassination." And he thought he was.
Gary, where do we go about getting some closure for this case? There's so many conspiracy theories, of course, but there has to be closure at the end of the day. And
of course there is.
And with that,
it's really simple. It's Prayer Man. If you identify Prayer Man as Oswald, everything opens up. Everything that even the dead ends need to be looked at again. But the thing is that it probably won't happen, not in our lifetime. So unless a good copy of a film shows up. But overall, if you look at the documentation, which is what I have been doing for the last 7 years, rock solid, instead of reading books, is the fact that was there a conspiracy? Well, it's really simple. Just look at Parkland versus Bethesda, and you have your conspiracy. If you want to look at basically how certain documents disappear, so like Rob already just earlier explained, and so there are many other occasions that this has happened. If you look at how 1960s Southern state was dealing with matters as such, and for them, it was the only thing to basically get all these people of the federal agencies out of the back of their necks, because they were basically lurching over their shoulder at all times while this was happening, and rightly so. But of course, they were basically being used to a certain method of how to deal with things, and that involves racism, that involves swift justice, harsh justice, and the fact that Oswald was marked as a communist defector within 45 minutes of his arrest, that didn't help either. The fact that he killed a cop and basically was judged as such by everybody in that building who were there. So, for example, there were about 4 or 5 fellow TSPD workers, and even his supervisor were there when Oswald was basically brought in as such. So if you want to find out, if you prove that Oswald's innocent and not in that 6th floor, because the DPD couldn't put him in there as per Jesse Curry's statement, then if you prove, then a whole different case starts to show up. And then of course you can say, well, who shot him then? Well, we don't know. Well, was it a conspiracy? Well, look at the medical evidence. Boom, job done. So as long as you point out that Oswald is basically standing on those steps, on that portal of the steps of the Texas School Book Depository, and show that that the 2nd floor lunchroom encounter wasn't happening, and that his alibi was destroyed in his very first interrogation as such. The very first interrogation, he basically said where he was at that time when the shooting. He was outside in front with Bill Shelley. And on the other one, and that was in Fritz's notes, and the other one, which is Hostie's notes, he basically said that he was going outside after lunch and watched the presidential parade. So if you point out that Oswald's innocent of shooting the president, then the whole deck of cards falls apart.
Well, yeah, I've spoke to our mutual friend Greg Parker at length about Prayer Man. Speak to Greg quite a bit, and he's been telling me about all the kind of things that's been happening with regards to Prayer Man. as regards to proving Oswald is innocent, I don't think there's any credible evidence, not any strong evidence in this case that says he's guilty. I think, as I've said earlier, I don't think this case could have went to court. I think this case, any competent defence lawyer would have had these charges dropped before it went to any trial. Hence why he was murdered.
I don't know, but it's a southern state, and there are legion of examples of injustice. I mean, Henry Wade's tenure itself, I think they overturned about 19 or 20 cases, and that was only because of Henry Wade himself, by actually keeping all the DNA evidence locked up and stored. And that's how they found out that certain cases from the 70s and the 80s were just completely, were just a mess. And then police cutting corners, and cutting corners, I'm talking about shoving statements on the people's faces to tell them to sign it as such. As to DAs, district attorneys, basically being told to go for the highest punishment available as such. Conviction at all costs. That was the mantra during Henry Wade's tenure in there. But then again, you can point to Henry Wade, but at the same time, Henry Wade is someone who's a public official who's been voted in. So the people voted him in for that whole period. And there are not many DAs nationwide that are actually have had a tenure that long in the United States as Henry Wade had.
I think, though, with the attention of the world media, if Oswald had went to trial, the focus on this case would have, well, the world's attention would have been on it. I don't think they could have got away with the things that they were doing for lesser cases. In fact, I strongly believe that it would have been moved venue. I don't think it would have been in Dallas the case. I think it would have been moved elsewhere, because
it could have been done anywhere. It could have been done anywhere. It doesn't matter, because you even read the cases about police acting wrongly, and they were acting wrongly in LA during the RFK case. You've got examples from Chicago, New York, you name it. Any other police, it could have happened anywhere. So basically, when people say, oh, it should have happened in the South, blah, 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 it could have happened anywhere, because all these police forces have some sort of corruption or mismanagement examples from in these last 5 decades as such. It doesn't make any difference. To me, it doesn't. And another thing you need to really, which everyone who investigates this case needs to think about, and I've been fortunate to see a lot of documentation as such, is the fact that when did all this stuff become available? And you know what? This is all over decades. It's over 4 to 5 decades that this stuff, it is now that we're able to form a quite well-informed opinion as such. But 2 decades in the 90s, when the JFK film was out, people were a lot more ignorant of the facts than they were now. I mean, it's because of more research has been done, and B, the documents have been coming out sporadic, bit by bit as such. That's another thing. I mean, I'm amazed because I've been looking into the very first generation of researchers, people like Mark Lane, Shirley Martin, Sylvia Marr, and how close they were. And, they started writing rebuttals. Like the first rebuttal already came in September of '64. That was the month that the Warren Report was released as such. And then there was another one made by Sylvia Marr in November of 1964. And I've seen these documents, and I'm going to share them with everyone very soon, that were given to me by John Callan. And I mean, I'm telling you, it's like amazing how the bits they could pick through. And when Salandria says the case was solved in the 60s, I believe him. I totally believe him, because they knew already how to pick the holes and what was wrong and what didn't make any sense. And actually, they were right, because the documents that have come out over the period of time afterwards, over these decades, and especially the ones that I've been looking at, it's basically all confirmation of what those guys in the 60s already thought was wrong as such.
Yeah. If Oswald had a Mark Lane to represent him, even during the Warren Commission hearings,
he wasn't allowed.
He wasn't allowed, no. But we would have probably had a different story. Well, maybe because Mark Lane would have been able to cross-examined witnesses. He would have challenged the veracity of evidence as well. But Roger, no, Roger Craig, was it Mr. Craig? Was it Dean Craig? Mr. Craig, who was the head of the Bar Association, who was there to represent Oswald. He turned up a handful of times and he didn't know anything really about the case.
Yeah, but overall, most of the people of the Warren Commission didn't show up themselves. There was 2 or 3 people that were there most of the time, whereas the other 4 were only sporadically. Only when the really big important interviews came. Some of the interviews were rounded up in, like, they had 3 interviews in 2 hours time, and just rounded it up real quick. So there wasn't that much interest to be present during all these so-called interviews as such.
Yeah, I maintain that Oswald, although the rights of someone who's dead, it's very debatable if they have rights or whatever. But I do say, I say that his rights were grossly violated, and his constitutional rights while he was alive was grossly violated as well.
That's correct, because Oswald didn't have a phone call for 24 hours, and that's with proof. I can prove that. Oswald did not get this phone call until just before 2 o'clock on the 23rd. He was 24 hours without a lawyer, or whether even be able to try to contact a lawyer, because by the time he tried to contact John Abt, he was, John Abt was chilling out in Connecticut or something like that, and his office was in New York. So, and actually newsmen were in touch with him or his secretary before actually Oswald was managing to, because he said in the morning of the 23rd that he wanted to talk to John Abt, and it took at least like 3 or 4 hours before he finally got his phone call to do so, and he never managed to get hold of him. So,
who do you think gave Oswald the name of Abt? Because
that's a really good question.
Yeah, because he says something, and doesn't he say something along the lines of, "I want to speak to this attorney in New York. I think his name's Mr. Abt," or something like that.
That's correct. He did it in front of an ABC camera. I found this out about, 6 or 9 months ago. There was a snippet, and I think it was Bob. I forgot his last name now, but he had a dead microphone in his hand, and then later on related in 2 interviews, also I think on the 40th anniversary, what exactly happened as such. And the actual fragment I've seen, the microphone is dead that he holds, and then later on somebody shoves a microphone forward. But no one knows who the source is for that. I haven't found that.
Didn't Oswald attend a civil liberties meeting with Michael Payne?
Yeah,
maybe that's where he got the legal briefs name from.
Well, the ACLU showed up around 11 o'clock on the 22nd. It was Greg Olds and Greer Raggio and 2 other people. And from what I've read so far, Greg Olds has said, he's still alive, by the way. I should call him up. Greg Olds said that they basically were getting phone calls from New York and so forth, and basically saying, well, what the hell's going on? How come this guy's still in the corridor saying he needs a lawyer, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. So all that news footage, of course, is all on the 6 and 7 o'clock news from the afternoon earlier. And basically then people on the East Coast get wind of all this. So they say, like, this guy has legal rights, blah, blah, blah. Greg Olds then went with the other 3. They tried to get hold of the mayor. Okay, couldn't get hold of him. And then they said, well, we'll go down to the station. So when they went down, tried to talk to Fritz, but Fritz wouldn't see them. So they spoke to Glenn King, who was more or less a captain, who was a captain as well, but it was a spokesperson for Fritz as well. He spoke to the press. And they basically get the runaround. But they also, at the same time, you find out that there's 2 other attorneys there that are hanging around around room 317, which is the robbery and homicide division. And there are 2 attorneys there present. One is a former Dallas DA, but now private, and and there's another one who is from SMU University, and he's also a lawyer, and they never ever intend to help. Now, they might have been the source and say, like, maybe you should, because you're a communist, blah blah blah, you should talk to a communist lawyer, etc., etc. But nobody knows really what happened on that apt bit, where it comes from as such. Only know that it only was uttered on Saturday morning, the 23rd, not before that. And this is what Fritz was lying about in his reports. He said, like, I offered him a lawyer and he said he was going to get apt, blah, blah, blah. But that was all November. That is never happened. He said it was happening on the 22nd, but that's a lie. It all happened on the 23rd as such. Anyway, this is not my talk, it's Rob's talk. Sorry.
You're doing fine, Bart.
Yeah, I bet.
You know, I love to hear you talk.
Yeah, I love the
I'd
sound
like
of my.
I'd like to say this about Bart. There for a while, I thought he was reviewing my book. I basically show that Oswald had not been on the 6th floor after about 11:55, and we know his whereabouts within 5-minute intervals till 12:25, and we know where he's at 12:31, all on the 2nd floor.
No.
Now, if he, or 1st floor, one of the two.
Well, first floor.
Yeah, 1st floor. And I think, I don't know this, but I think he was actually out on the front steps, standing next to Lovelady. And actually, there's a book about that by Larry Rivera, I believe his name is, and they have pictures. So if he was standing on the front steps, it would have been a really hard shot to get it from the 6th floor. But what makes it even more difficult is that Gary and I interviewed Madeline Brown, and she asked Martina, if you could say one thing, what would you want the people to know about? And Martina said, well, the day after the assassination, they came to the house and picked up Lee's gun. So how did it get back there? Now, that's obviously, I don't have that anyway other than in an interview with Madeline, but it's interesting at least. So there's a lot of other things in the book too, but basically my sense is we prove Oswald was not the assassin, and his involvement was as a person who was trying to stop the assassination. And so that's my 2 cents worth.
I think one of the most overlooked parts of this whole case, and one of the most important, was Ian Griggs's work done with the assembling and disassembling of the rifle. And I watched a presentation done on YouTube, and it was Ian Griggs. He was assembling the rifle with the screwdriver, and it goes to show just how much work goes into actually assembling this weapon. And of course, no screwdriver was found on the 6th floor after the assassination, so they said that it could be assembled with a dime coin. And Ian Griggs tried this, and he said he tried it until he got blood blisters on his fingers, and he says it couldn't be done.
Yeah.
So it's one of the most important aspects of the case for me. Oswald could not assemble that rifle. He had no tool to do it.
True.
Okay, shall we, are there any more questions or comments, guys, or are we okay to wrap up?
Actually, I've got one question for Bart.
Yeah, go ahead, Neil.
Bart, whilst you're on, mate. When you were on Rob's show at the end of last year, you said you've got a big bombshell coming, a big reveal. Right?
Several reveals.
You're amongst friends now, Bart. Do we need to wait for the third article, the anatomy of the Texas School Book Depository, or can you give us a little teaser?
Well, I can tell you now that the reveals that I did were done early this year. The first one was the reveal of several other Hosty notes, and it was actually some lone nut or arsehole that prodded me into looking into this, because I hadn't looked into it because I only found one document in February, but I knew there were other documents in that pile, but it was 200 pages and I was just weren't in the mood to go through it all. So at that point I went through it all, and then all of a sudden a much bigger picture started to emerge. And I'm safe to say that there is actually 2 instances of Hosty on paperwork where he says that Oswald Way was, and that together with the Fritz notes. So I thought that was important. The other thing was the fact that I started to read about how what Hosty actually did when he walked out of the interrogation that he was present at, and that was around 4 o'clock. And he had made notes in his notebook, but he also, according to his book, had a pad of blank affidavit paper. And that's how when I found the note in Malcolm's archives about that he was going to watch the presidential parade as such, I put it much more in better context, because what Hosty did was, after he walked out of there, he did speak to Secret Service agent Forrest Sorrells, but he also went into the second room inside 317 and went through the evidence that they at that point had collected so far and wrote down all the bits on the back of Dallas police affidavit paper. Now, the so-called second Hosty note, the one that I found in Malcolm's archive, is written on the back of that affidavit paper. So you can pretty much pinpoint it as in late afternoon, around 4 or 5, between 4 and 6 o'clock, that Hosty wrote that preliminary report, because that's what it is actually, because afterwards he made the first report with Jim Bookhout together. And after Oswald died, Jim Bookhout made another report about that particular interrogation, and he twisted things around 180 degrees on 2 or 3 instances. The second thing that I found out was, while I was, my third paper, it's almost finished, the Texas School Book Depository one, I found out that the 3 boys, the 3 black men on the 5th floor, went downstairs to the 4th floor and spoke to some women. And it was basically described as like all these women. And these women are basically related to Victoria Adams' descent, because of course Adams and Stiles ran down the stairs, and Dorothy Garner, who was a supervisor, went basically towards that corner where those stairs were and looked out the window. What we know from the statements of the women on that 4th floor, that there were at least 8, if not 10, women on that 4th floor when it was going down. So you had Adams, Stiles, Garner, and Elsie Dorman, who filmed that turn on with the Dorman film. Those 4 were clearly together, but there were at least another 4, if not 6, and I believe it's 6, were on that same floor as well. This wasn't a very highly compartmentalized floor. It was pretty open overall. Now, the men from the 5th floor went down after several minutes, because they also went west on the building and looked outside the window and down, and then decided to go downstairs via the steps. They stopped at that 4th floor and they talked to these women. Now, if you read all the statements of everyone, then at first it's happening. Then they try to disown it like it didn't happen at all. That by itself is quite important, because what it is that the police and the FBI and the Secret Service, all 3 of them, completely neglected anything that was happening on the 4th floor, because Stiles wasn't interviewed by anyone. Victoria Adams' interview has apparently been changed, but most of the other women, they were barely interviewed at all. They didn't do statements and so forth. And Dorothy Garner's statement was just suppressed as such. So the federal agencies basically did their best to sweep this whole 4th floor thing under the carpet as such. So that's the second thing that I did a big article on that. The paper on the Texas School Book Depository is going to come out, I'd say, late summer. I'm waiting for some interviews to go through. And on top of that, I've got a massive pile of documents in Cheltenham to pick up. Once I've been through all that, I'm deciding whether to release it, because it'll be at a stage where I can say, yeah, all right, fine. Then I've got a prayer man paper. The prayer man paper also is in a pretty far developed stage as such, but I'm not sure if I'm going to release them at the same time, which I wanted to do, but otherwise that will be released just before Christmas. And then I'm going to release updates on the first paper and the second paper. The interrogations paper is increased by about, I don't know, 30 pages maybe, no, 50 pages of material that's been added to it. So it's going to be, especially the interrogations paper is a very detailed paper in the sense of a timeline as such. Now, like I said, I waited for some interviews. Once I get these interviews, I'm going to add bits, quotes from it. I got an interview with Jack Doherty that was done in the early 70s. I'm using a few bits from that. Jack Doherty was painted as a retard by Roy Truly, the supervisor of the Texas School Book Depository. But I think Jack Doherty is much smarter than he lets on. This whole PTSD thing, etc., etc. He probably may have it. I'm not disputing that. But from the audio tape that I've got and listened to, he's very clever and he's very guarded and so forth. So I don't know about Doherty. I find Doherty one of the most suspicious people of the whole bunch in that building as such. And then the other thing I could tell you now is that I've got a copy of the Wiegman film, and it's in 5K, which is big, really big. And the problem is that the copy is okay for certain observations, but the quality of it isn't as good as I would like it to be. So I thought I had the jackpot. We got it about, God, when was this? Just about 9 months ago. And I've been looking deeply into it. And but the problem is that, yeah, it's either the dupe itself that was made for that particular company that was selling me a copy. It's just, you know what, in the 60s, I mean, think about a duplicating process and this whole press thing and being as quick as possible and blah, blah, blah. I've learned certain things about the Wiegman film. The majority of the frames are blurred, and I mean blurred, even the ones of the Texas School Book Depository front. But there are some images where you can say, I can get the result from this. I can tell you that Richard Sprague, who had a copy of the Wiegman film in 67, 68, had the same observations as what I got. I basically said that Richard Sprague was dead on in choosing what image could show Prayer Man. But I'm telling you, unless I see a first generation copy or the original, I can't really say much about it. But of course there's an individual, and of course it's Oswald, because it's not like some badge man bullshit, like everybody starts making things up and draw stuff. You can actually see someone there. And I think the paperwork from Fritz's notes and Bookhout's notes is you know, it's the cherry top as such. Like I said, you need to put the things in the context. Everyone disowned him in the Texas School Book Depository the second he was brought in as a cop killer. Because nobody started talking about him shooting the president as such until in the evening. And at that point, several statements had already been taken of Shelley, of Lovelady. I mean, two of Lovelady and two of Shelley. Jack Doherty was another one. And basically Shelley and Lovelady nailed him to the cross. The second they found that he was arrested, a cop killer and a communist traitor, not a problem, you know, in a conservative town like Dallas. It's a piece of piss, you know. Just put it into current context of saying somebody who worked in a drone factory for ISIS in Syria and basically gets caught as a murderer, possible murderer, as a cop killer. Everyone will distance themselves from him as such. And again, at that point, when the case is already going on for 24 hours as such, nobody's going to go, oh, hold on, I've got to say something because he wasn't there. I mean, Carolyn Arnold did, but that statement got dumped and buried right there and there. So, you know. So there's a couple of bits basically coming out with that work. But most importantly is that I've worked very hard on the archive that we've got. And we are having right now an archive of about of Harry Livingston and Malcolm Blunt. And the Malcolm Blunt is about 40,000 pages. And there's going to be another 30 to 40,000 pages going to be added to that because I've got a set of bags basically that I need to pick up from Cheltenham. They were ready for me to go in March, but Malcolm didn't want to see anyone at that time, rightly so. And so there's a lot more stuff coming. There's a lot more puzzling stuff coming that Malcolm couldn't figure out. Oswald in Finland, for instance, you know, things like that. So a lot of people can basically delve into that. I've got only the top brass knows this so far is I got a load of microfilm reels. So these are like in a library, like microfiche, you know, when you have those little things that you just put in. These are reels with just with documents on them, and I had 26 of them, and I've just had them all digitized, and I've been uploading them. And we're talking about Oswald evidence. We're talking about Cuban exiles in the 80s, and we're talking about Wagner Carr's archive. And Wagner Carr's archive is very interesting because he's got bits in there that haven't been released as such by the Dallas police. So I've just had a glance at it and stuff like that. But you're talking about like each reel was holding like more than 2,000 pages. So, you know, you do the math. And so I've basically been adding them. And now the other stuff is going to come. That's going to take me till the end of the year. And then finally the whole Blunt archive is finished as such. So that has slowed my research down. But at the same time, I find a few tidbits here and there that help me. I add on with my research. And these are really obscure interviews done by researchers in the 60s and the 70s as such. So that's all what's coming. And then hopefully by the end of this year, I've done basically all 4 papers finished off. Then the only thing that's left over is to go to Washington and Dallas. So, and do some real research.
You mentioned, again, I think it was on Rob's show, that Ed LaRue rang Marina to confirm that Prayer Man was Lee.
Yeah,
I'm surprised that the research community hasn't made a big splash about that. What's your thoughts there?
Okay, this happened 18 months ago. And what happened was that I said at some point, no, I made a mention of it, but I think it was Stan Dane of the Prayer Man book and Greg Parker, Ed Ledoux, and and maybe 1 or 2 others in a private conversation discussed this and go, we need to contact Marina. And I was like, you know, why don't we just send it and nothing ventured, nothing gained, blah, blah, blah. So that's what we did. And so we sent her, Stan Dane sent her, we got her address, and Stan Dane sent her a couple of photographic prints of the Wiegmann, of the Darnell film. And also sent a book. And Marina was really easy with the whole thing because what happened was that Ed called her because after a week or 2, we didn't hear anything back. And they said, all right, okay, let's call her up. So
it's 6 o'clock.
What's that? Oh, Ed
it's
called her up.
6 o'clock.
Oh. Ed called her up and
time for a beer.
Yay.
And
time for you to stop talking, Bart. Sorry, Bart, go ahead.
Called her up, and 25 minutes later, she rang back, and it was completely unexpected. And she rang back and she volunteered it. She didn't say, like, after a question, like, who do you think it is? Or what's about the guy in the top left corner, blah, blah, blah. She just went, it's Lee. So I said to her, did you record it? And he went, no, because she called me back. I didn't have the recorder on. And I was like, and I said, you need to call her back. And she needs to confirm what she said and if we can use that quote. So this time Ed did record the conversation. And she said that, yeah, you can use it, that it's Lee, because blah, blah, blah. We asked her whether she had been confronted with this before. And she said yes. And I also spoke to the daughter of Jimmy Darnell, the filmmaker. That was last year in August. That's an interview that's going to go into the Prayer Man paper. And she said as well that she'd been confronted with it. I think a lot of people are aware of it. But the cherry on top is what's missing. You just need that one scan. It's going to be difficult, I have to tell you. A, in obtaining that scan, and B, the amount of blur that's present in both films. So whether we're going to get the shot, I don't know. But from a paper point of view and the statements and the whole puzzle, I'm going to be done by the end of this year with the whole thing. Then the only thing that's left over is for me to go down there and talk to the few people that are still alive as such. A lot of the women that worked inside the Texas School Book Depository are still alive because they were only 19, early 20s, so they're now in their mid-70s. So, I could talk to them. So that will be probably an addition, an update to the papers once I release them. And, that's then also the only thing I need to do is hunt the film down. So I've got leads, but I'm just going to wait, because first I'm going to do the paperwork and then I'm going to film down because I know where they are. And we'll see.
That was good.
Yeah, cool.
Just let me say one. It was great, Bart.
Thank you.
Before we go, there's you guys might be interested in a gentleman here in Minneapolis. He's a retired psychologist, about 78 years old. And when he was a student at Cornell University, Mark Lane showed up, must have been 65, 6, starting to make the rounds about his research. And Gary Schoner may be familiar to you. He's cited in a lot of places, including Mellon's book, I think. But because of his experience with Lane at Cornell University, got him interested, and he proceeded to become a part of the Garrison investigation. And he admittedly doesn't keep up reading books these days, but his memory and ability to articulate what went on in New Orleans with Garrison and his participation as say a 22, 3, 4, 5-year-old is amazing. And I'm sure that he has information about Beckham, Jack Martin, who, like we said earlier, is from Minneapolis. So if you guys are interested, I can see if he would be interested in being a part of one of these Zoomers.
Be good for Rob to get in touch with him.
Yeah, anybody that knew him back then would be a huge asset, to try to corroborate anything that he has to say about any of these folks down there. There's other people that are involved with the Garrison investigation and have things to say about Jack Martin and Thomas Beckham, like David Lewis, for instance, and a lot of Garrison's investigators at the time. And just to wrap everything up, I'd like, people. Question was asked before, what I thought about Garrison's investigation and all that, and I think to imagine the JFK assassination timeline without it. I mean, could you imagine never having the movie JFK, never having the Garrison investigation? A lot of this stuff that happened in New Orleans we would never even know about it.
Yeah.
All we would have is Dallas, and that's it. So even though you might not agree with where Garrison took his investigation and where it ended up, the fact that we have it and we know more than we did without it is invaluable to all of us, and we all benefit from it. I think a lot of people can say that their introduction into the case was the movie JFK, despite its factual errors and historical accuracy about some things, but it did open a lot up for people, the interest in the case, and of course, the JFK Files Act, which we all benefit from today in obtaining all these documents from these various agencies. So that's basically all I got.
I agree. We're very lucky that certain things have basically added to the fact that records have been released and so forth.
Okay. Well, Rob, again, thank you so much. It's been a really good talk, and I've really enjoyed the discussion and your presentation. Thanks to everybody. Gary, thank you for coming along as well. And John, Delane, it's lovely to see you both again. And hopefully we'll do it again really soon. But thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. That was really good. And thank you, Rob.
Thanks,
Thank
Neil.
you, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
Hey, thank you guys for inviting me. I had a blast, and I'm definitely going to show up for these from now on. And I love being part of Dealer Plaza UK.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
And I'm truly honored and to be a part of it, and to be able to share an interest with all you guys. And thank you very much for inviting me. I had a blast.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers now. Bye,
Okay, everybody.